Petito and Brian Laundrie that's now being dissected online as the search for laundry enters a new month on the calendar. More folks on social media now asking, will Brian Laundrie ever be found, and how close are we to justice for Gabby Petito? We're live with the experts for a Q&A roundtable where we'll be answering your questions here live on WFLA Now. Hey there, folks. JB Buno here with you live on WFLA Now. Can't wait to get to our experts here. We're going to, of course, introduce them here to you. We're going to give folks an extra moment or two here to file into the Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and, of course, comment sections and on WFLA.com and the WFLA app. We'll be taking your questions here via social media, Twitter as well. You can use hashtag HJB, hashtag WFLA Now, or any of the hashtags that you now see here on your screen. Great to have all of our experts, our panel here for the next hour here, folks, on WFLA Now. We're going to be talking about everything that we know here and all the questions that we've been fielding from you, our viewers here on WFLA Now over the last several weeks here. Let's start by going here around the horn here. We'll go kind of clockwise. Brian Camerino, our WFLA audience knows him well. You've seen him on WFLA News Channel 8, criminal defense attorney here in Tampa, well known for handling some big cases here, of course, in the Tampa Bay area. If you watch WFLA News Channel 8, if you've been with us here before on WFLA Now, you know Brian Camerino. Great to have on, for the first time here on WFLA Now, Anthony Rickman, who's handled thousands of cases himself here, and of course, Hillsborough County, former Hillsborough State Prosecutor. Great to have Anthony here on the program. Looking forward to tapping into his expertise here. And Ken Stevens, 35 years experience in law enforcement, in patrol, forensics, investigative, youth education, court security, and of course, tapping into him as well. He's over in Pinellas County now serving, of course, as a private investigator with SIG 14 investigation. So great to have everybody here on the panel. I'm going to start here with you, Ken. We're going to take questions from our social media audience here, but I'm going to kind of take some of the questions here that we've been receiving over the last several days, last couple of weeks here, questions that we've been receiving from our social media audience that would be perfect for all three of you to answer. But Ken, I'm going to come here to you first and ask you, how does somebody just disappear in the year 2021? It is so difficult with technology and everybody knowing everybody's whereabouts. It's so difficult to just vanish. And Brian Laundrie right now is off the grid. They don't know where he is. So I've been saying it's extraordinarily difficult, but just how difficult is it? And where is your hope right now as far as them being able, the FBI and local law enforcement being able to find Brian Laundrie wherever he may be?
Well, first of all, appreciate you having me on. It's not difficult to disappear for a limited period of time. And the ways you do that, simply put, are end any of your contracts, quit using your credit cards, debit cards, anything of that nature, lose the phone that you currently have, and don't tell anybody where you're going. The difficult part of this is that's a discipline that's hard to maintain. And the longer this goes on, the higher the chance is that somebody like Brian is going to make a mistake, step out and make himself visible in the public eye, and somebody's going to let us know where he's at.
Is that where we are at this stage right now, Ken, in your opinion? It's waiting on Brian, again, if he is alive out there, is it waiting on him to make a mistake for there to be that significant break that law enforcement needs to track him down?
Well, I think so. We obviously don't know all the information that law enforcement has, but I would be inclined to think if law enforcement knew where he was at right at this minute, we would have a breaking news story as well. So yes, I think we're waiting for somebody to give a tip or give some information, or them to identify a burner phone or a facial recognition on some camera, because his face is pretty familiar by now.
Let's continue to, of course, remind folks of the facts here on the story. We're going to get Bryant and Anthony in here in just a second. But the facts of the story are this. Brian Laundrie right now is a sole person of interest in an FBI-led criminal investigation to the homicide of Gabby Petito. But the arrest warrant, the federal arrest warrant that has been issued, is not connected to the homicide investigation that is currently underway, at least publicly here at this time, based on what we know from the FBI. And we just don't know all that much from the FBI because they are the Federal Bureau of Investigations. They are the FBI, and that's just their MO. And of course, we'll tap into everyone's experience here as far as, federal-led investigations here. But again, Brian Laundrie is the subject of a federal arrest warrant at this time that is not connected to Gabby Petito's homicide. It is for, again, using the debit card, the Capital One debit card, that charge being, we have the indictment right here, use of unauthorized access devices. Let's bring in Anthony. Let's bring in Bryant here. Again, two prominent criminal defense attorneys here in the Tampa Bay area. I'll ask each one of you here to answer this question, and this is my number one question here for the two of you. We've been talking a lot about Stephen Bertolino. He is the attorney for, of course, Brian Laundrie, and we've been hearing all of his statements, and you've been, of course, I'm sure, following his statements being released out to the media here. And I want to talk about Brian Laundrie's parents here specifically. We have seen with other missing persons cases that if somebody goes missing and there are parents out there that are just trying to find their son or their daughter, they're actively out there participating in search efforts. I know I've said this on stream before. I'm not a father, but if it was my child, I would be out there day and night. If I had any hope that he was a Carlton Reserve, I would be combing through the mud, doing anything that I could to track down my child. Or at the very least, if I couldn't, I would be on the front lawn of my home, pleading for the public, please come forward, and give us some information, putting the tip line out there, 1-800-CALL-FBI. We haven't seen Brian Laundrie's parents out there actively searching for Brian. We haven't seen that public plea, that press conference, even though we, of course, had Gabby Petito, the Petito and Schmidt families with that emotional press conference that we had earlier this week. Brian Laundrie's parents are pretty much just staying at home and only leaving for the trips that they deem are necessary. Brian, I'll start here with you. What do you make of that?
Interesting point. So here's the deal. If, from a layman's point of view, absolutely, their silence speaks volumes. Why are they out there? But if I were the family lawyer, I would say, look, you may be hurting, you may be distressed, just much as Gabby's families were distressed. But if you go out there and you subject yourself to interviews, subject yourself to law enforcement scrutiny, and you say something that could implicate yourself or implicate your son, then I would advise them not to speak. Just, let law enforcement do their job. Because even though it looks and sounds bad that they're not saying anything, from a legal standpoint, I would be advising them, look, they're watching you. They suspect that you may have had something to do with your son not appearing, not responding. So just stay out of it. Let law enforcement do their job and be quiet. Otherwise, anything you say on air or anything you say to the law enforcement, they're going to use it against you and potentially against your son. So from a legal standpoint, I don't see anything wrong with it. As a father myself, absolutely, I'm wondering why aren't they? But then I put on my lawyer hat and I'd be advising them just to keep their mouths quiet.
What do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, I agree with Brian. When you look at this family, what have they done since day one? When Gabby was initially missing, they released a statement that they want to stay in the background. Well, Gabby lived with them. She was part of their family. She goes missing. Allegedly, their son's with them, and they released a statement at first that they want to stay in the background while law enforcement looks for Gabby. Meanwhile, their son's the person of interest. And then their son goes missing, and now they're staying in the background again. As a father, I agree with Brian. I'll be out there looking everywhere I can. But these parents have a little more involvement than just staying in the background. Look, they're the ones who said that he left the house on a date. He went to the preserve. They then go to the preserve, and this son who they care about, they find his car. They see the car in the preserve. They leave it there for a couple of days, then go get it and bring it back home to them. And as a lay person, or as anyone looking at this case, you're just going to leave your son in the woods by himself with his vehicle, taking his vehicle home? And then you see days later, after he disappears in the woods, after they'll get his car, bring it back, days later, they then report him missing to the FBI. And what Brian's saying is, they gave an interview to the FBI. We know they spoke for at least 2 hours. And during this interview, they made statements. Now, as that parent's attorney, their attorney's got to be very careful that these parents didn't mislead law enforcement, didn't make false statements to law enforcement. So they're going to be very careful with anything they say to law enforcement. We also don't know what the FBI has told them. We don't know if the FBI has told them to take a step back, don't do anything, let law enforcement handle this, let law enforcement look for your son. But obviously, in this circumstance, as a person, as human beings, we have questions. From a legal perspective, it's in their best legal interest to stay back, let law enforcement do their job, and invoke, especially considering where they're at, continue their silence.
Engaging a new digital audience here live on WFLA Now. Again, live here with attorneys Bryant Camerano, Anthony Rickman, right here in the Tampa Bay area. Of course, measurable experience here as far as criminal law here in Tampa Bay. And of course, also having Ken Stevens joining us from Pinellas County here, folks, bringing his 35 years of law enforcement and his private investigative career here as well into the equation here. So it's great to have just all of this experience here to tap into as we engage a new digital audience. See all of the hashtags here around your screen on the yellow stripes. Use any of them and we can animate your comment here on screen. So we're going to show you some snippets of the Utah video, the new Utah body camera angle here in just a moment. But I want to get some conversation going here from our audience, and we're going to start here from Twitter. And again, any of these hashtags across any social media platform, we can tap into it here at WFLA Now. It's from Linda Ferg, and I think I'm coming your way on this one here, Ken. Hashtag, hey JB, why did it take 4 days for Brian to become a person of interest when on September 11th, Gabby was reported missing and Northport PD knew that Brian came home without her? NPPD came to the house 3 times that day and got the van. And Ken, maybe you can just kind of address this comment here from Linda and also just the amount of criticism that there has been there online. A lot of folks online that wished that there was more focus on Brian Laundrie right when he came back from that cross-country road trip in Gabby's van here. We've been talking so much here about the timeline. I spoke to Josh Taylor, spokesperson for Northport Police, a couple of weeks ago, and Josh Taylor said that his exact words were, "We don't track residents." This is before he was said to be a person of interest, as Linda Ferg here is noting. So I guess the question here, I want you to address Linda's question here from Twitter, Ken, but also, should law enforcement have been on Brian right when he came home, or are there protocols in place where they have to wait for certain things to get accomplished and wait for certain things to rise to that level before that they can actively, monitor his whereabouts?
Well, I think the most important protocol is this: active criminal investigations, which this certainly is not public information. Law enforcement routinely makes press releases, but they do that because there's a need to get certain amounts of information out that may help or assist an investigation. They don't do that because it's our obligation to get information out. So what they knew, when he was a person of interest, what they knew, and when they knew it. Do I think it's a fair question to ask? I do. And some of these videos, there's a lot of questions being asked as far as why was he not taken into custody and so forth. We don't have we have snippets. We don't have all the information, but we have enough to ask questions.
Let's take the next question here. Thanks a lot, Ken. How about this one that just came in here from, and I think I'm coming your way here, Anthony, on this one. Ashley Nicole Campbell, and of course, Brian, if you'd like to chime in here as well, both of you guys, of course, being experts on the law. Ashley Nicole Campbell, hashtag HJB. It's their she made this comment when I was talking about the federal arrest warrant for use of unauthorized access devices. Of course, that's connected to the credit card, the alleged credit card fraud. And Ashley saying, hashtag AJB, that's their gateway charge to bring him in. Once they have him, I bet that more charges will follow, I'm sure. So, Anthony, I'll start here with you. What is the likelihood, in your professional opinion, in your opinion here, what is the likelihood that they do have other charges just ready to go for Brian Laundrie once they do locate him, that they're just not ready to fully tell the public here at this time?
When a federal investigation is occurring in the background. The federal government doesn't broadcast what they're doing. We know in this particular case that an autopsy was conducted. We know that they went back to the house after an autopsy. We know Brian's been named a person of interest, and quite frankly, in the federal system, he may be much more than that. What we do know is the federal government has decided to charge Brian with a crime that they feel they can prove that's use of her credit card without her permission and as an authorized use of her credit card. What this charge allows the federal government to do is to take him into custody and hold him in custody. knowing now that he's an extreme flight risk. There's a pending charge. We know he's on the run. We know no one can locate him. When and if he is picked up, this charge will allow law enforcement to hold him, most likely without bond, be transported to Wyoming to answer those charges. While this federal authorities, the FBI, local law enforcement in Wyoming, Utah, they can still conduct their investigation in the background. Wait for the results of that autopsy. See if there's any direct evidence linked. See if there's any evidence around the body. And then ultimately, if either state or federal officials determine that enough evidence exists to charge him, then he'll be charged. But again, he doesn't have to be named a suspect, a person of interest. The government can arrest him. There may be a grand jury seated right now for a potential indictment. We don't know these things. And at the end of the day, we do know at least one charge has been filed against him, and that's going to allow the government to hold him while they conduct investigations.
Anthony, I'm glad you brought up the potential for there being the grand jury getting involved here. We're going to come back to that in a little while here. Brian, I'm going to ask you have, of course, you can respond to the same question for Ashley, but I'm also going to throw up this one here because we want to get as many comments here going on the Facebook Live and YouTube Live and Twitter comment section here. Stephanie, #KJB, why have an attorney if you're missing or possibly deceased? And I just want to jump off of this comment here from Stephanie here and ask you about Brian Laundrie having an attorney so early on here. Brian, of course, returning home on September 1st and having an attorney almost immediately. What do you make of that, of course, with all of the many cases that you've represented? What do you make of him having an attorney so early on, before he was deemed missing, before he was named a person of interest, just him returning back to Florida in Gabby's van?
You know, many people don't want to hear this, but it was a smart move. I mean, you know, I can just jump on the last question real quick. It seems to me that there's no cause to arrest him at this point for the death. We're still waiting for the results. We're still waiting for the cause of death. We know, I think it was homicide at least. So on the one hand, I think they had enough public cause to issue this federal charge to hold him, as Anthony pointed out, and maybe interview him and maybe get a confession from him. But the absence of an arrest warrant for the murder or the homicide of Gabby speaks volumes again. So, but in terms of him getting a lawyer, it's a smart move. I mean, that's a basic fundamental right that we have, absolute right to remain silent, absolute right to counsel. So, you know, again, lay people may look at it as an admission of guilt. I think everyone in the world, civil libertarians all over the world would agree, he had that right, let him exercise that right. It doesn't look good, but it's a constitutional right. And so, you know, at this point, what do I make of it? That it was a smart move. But does it mean anything else? I don't want to be in that position to assume that it means that he's guilty of something when he may not be guilty.
I want to get each of your 2 cents on this very quickly. We were noting on stream that Stephen Bertolino, the attorney for Brian Laundrie, that being the attorney in New York, who's been, of course, we've been talking about him at the center of this as far as representing his client. He has been communicating with members of the media via text message a lot. And it hasn't been the copy and paste sort of responses. Bryant, Anthony, I know that you guys deal with the media. I know that you deal with us and on our side of this equation here. When you respond, are you responding to individual reporters with individual questions, or if somebody has an inquiry, are you copying and pasting text messages here? Because Bridget Riley here, #KJB, is it normal for an attorney to communicate through the media solely by text messages? Would there be a reason why we haven't seen Stephen Bertolino over the last few weeks? I'll ask you guys to chime in this really quickly because we're about to play the Utah video here.
I was going to say real quick, I've done that because maybe just there's not enough time. But secondly, it avoids the press asking me that one question too many that could potentially look badly upon my client. So I've done it. Mr. Bertolini may be doing it for the same reason because there's just no time. Or he could be limiting the response to avoid any question that he can't ethically answer.
Yeah, as Brian said, you're controlling the medium by participating in a text message this way. There's cases where you give a blanket text to every media station across the country, but there are cases where you want to respond specifically to a specific question. But by doing it in text, you don't have the follow-up question. You can't say that word, no comment. As a lawyer, I hate saying no comment. By giving a quick, simple comment via text, you're allowed to control the dialogue, control your comment, and then move on to something else. The attorney also has to be careful because every time he answers, it seems like there's an additional question. There's an additional follow-up, and sometimes an attorney wants to communicate a little too much, may not be doing what's in his best interest of his client. So, his attorney needs to be careful in his responses especially considering that his clients have talked to the FBI. We don't know what they told him. He doesn't want to be in a position where he's essentially contradicting what his clients may have said or contradicting the evidence that the FBI may have, because he doesn't know.
I'm going to hold these guys to their pledge, especially Anthony there, to the pledge of no comment. The next time that I need a response on a story, I'm gonna play back this clip here for you. I have it now, folks. Let's get now to the Utah video. The police encounter there in Utah has of course been dissected, but now we have a new body camera angle. It's of course considerably long. We're gonna play back some moments here over the course of that here, and then Ken, I would like to hear kind of your perspective here, and as far as the police response here and how they handled this situation here in Utah. And then Anthony and Brian, well, what I'm going to ask the two of you to do, because they make ref here. Now, we're not experts in Utah law. We're, of course, all here in Florida, but they do make reference to what they are and are not allowed to do as far as handling the situation on the side of the road there in the field. So I'm going to ask you for all your perspectives, but this is a 3-minute snippet clip of some of the moments of this new Utah video. We'll come back in 3 minutes and continue the conversation. In the meantime, I'll be looking for more of your hashtag HeyJB or other hashtag hashtag HeyKen, hashtag HeyAnthony, hashtag HeyBrian. I'll be looking for your hashtag comments here in the Facebook Live, Twitter, and YouTube Live comment section here, and we'll bring them in here on WFLA Now. Let's listen in now. This is again 3 minutes from the Utah video, the new one of the new body camera angle.
How's it going?
How are we doing?
Good. Hey, we got a call about a male hitting a female and the two of them getting in this vehicle and taking off.
So I don't want to try and defend myself by saying anything here, but I pushed her away. She gets really worked up, and when she does, she swings, and she had her cell phone in her hand, so I was just trying to push her away. But Gabrielle, talking about fiance, right? What's that?
Is there something on your cheek here? Looks like, did you get hit in the face? Kind of looks like something like hitting you in the face. And then over on your arm, shoulder, right here. That's new, huh? Kind of a new mark. Can I see the other side of your face? So, what happened here and here?
I'm not sure. It was a... Yes, I was just trying to get in the back of the car and his backpack fell in the back.
So, the backpack got you? So there's two people that came to us and told us that they saw him hit you. There's two people saying that they saw him punch you. We're just independent witnesses by Moonflower.
Well, to be honest, I definitely hit him first.
Where'd you hit him?
I slapped him.
You slapped him first? And then just on his face?
You guys kind of just shut up.
How many times did you slap him?
Just a couple.
And then what? And then his reaction was to do what?
I don't know. So I slapped him.
He just grabbed you? Did he hit you though? I mean, it's okay if you're saying you hit him, and then I understand if he hit you, but we want to know the truth if he actually hit you. Because
I guess, yeah, but I hit him first.
Where did he hit you? Don't worry, just be
He
honest.
grabbed my face. It's like this.
Played your double partners, and you do have injury, and both an independent witness, probably the next one we're going to talk to as well, which we haven't talked to yet, but the one we did talk to, and your own companion have made it clear was the primary aggressor, and that she was striking you and that you received injuries. You haven't admitted to striking her. She has not admitted to you striking her. The witness did not see you strike her. So at this point, you're the victim of a domestic assault. That even if you didn't want to pursue this, we don't have a choice. The best thing we could do to not, the law says we have to charge her. It doesn't say we have to put her in jail. Okay, but it also says we have to separate, do a no contact order, and that we have to put her in jail if we cannot separate. And there's a little problem here is you guys live out of Florida, living in the van together. How are we supposed to separate you guys? Now, I don't want to take this small 20, what is she?
Yes, 22-year-old
female in jail. And you could definitely defend yourself against, but at the same time, we can't say because you're a male and she's a female, we can't treat this different than if you were the male hitting her.
Back here with you live on WFLA Now here, and let's bring in just one of the immediate responses here to that, and there's been a variety of different responses to this video here online. Terry, hashtag HJB, saying Moab City Police Department video clearly shows that Gabby was upset. Brian, on the other hand, is seen smiling and joking. We see that very clearly here we have two different demeanors here between how what Gabby's body language is like, clearly distraught, and what Brian's body language is like. People have been combing through this here. Ken, first and foremost, I just want to ask you, we've seen this video now. This is just another angle of the same encounter here. I just want to ask you for your response here to what you think as far as how the officers in Utah handled this. And again, we preface this by saying that domestic violence cases, we know from speaking to other experts, can be extraordinarily complicated. We're not experts here in Utah law, but what do you make here of this video and what you just watched?
Well, I briefly read the Utah statute, and I don't claim to be an expert in it, but the difference between the Utah statute and Florida statute, Florida has a preferred arrest policy, and Utah statute uses the terms that you shall arrest under certain circumstances. You're not supposed to arrest both parties. You're supposed to identify a primary aggressor, which they were discussing in this investigation. And I would like to have heard more about what the witnesses said. Was the witness testimony reliable? And the demeanor of both of them certainly speaks a lot. I don't like the demeanor that I see from him, but a person who's nervous can react in a lot of different ways, and that's something that you have to allow the officers to be able to assess. Again, I think there's reason to be suspect about the action that was taken. A 3-minute video clip and the total time that they were on scene, you could draw two completely different assessments of what should have been done.
And we have the entire video for you on WFLA.com and the WFLA app. Let's bring in Bryant here. Bryant, at the end of this video, it's not in the snippet, but I watched the video this morning. They were talking about whether or not, they were talking about protocol here, and they asked Gabby about whether or not there was intent to inflict bodily harm on again, and a lot of people pointing this out on social media, the officer identifying Brian as the victim here, at least at the side of the road, saying that you're the victim here. Gabby being asked whether or not, she was intentionally there to inflict bodily harm, of course, was part of the protocol here. What do you make here of this ending in their separation here, staying in separate hotel rooms that night, and there not being charges filed here against either of the two individuals involved?
Number one, I think the officers were complying with Wyoming law. I mean, it is what it is. And even though we're not experts on the Wyoming law, I think we know enough about probable cause. And I think here the probable cause established, and again, probable cause is that she probably committed the crime. I think there was enough probable cause to arrest her just based on the limited information that law enforcement had. So the question is, why did they arrest her? Now, in a way, I'm kind of glad they didn't. This poor girl was already victimized enough. But who knows, if she had been arrested, things may have been different. But I think that to criticize the officers because they didn't read the body language is unfair. And I'm not in any way supporting or advocating what happened. But based on what I've seen, the probable cause was that she was the aggressor. They said as much on the videotape. And she, I think, admits to trying to reach out for the phone, and he perhaps allegedly self-defended himself. So at the end of the day, to arrest either one of them based on body language, I think is unfair. But I think that they make the right call in not arresting either one of them and separating them under the circumstances. I think they had to, because again, otherwise they would have arrested her. Who knows? She may have been alive to this day, but we don't know that. But ultimately, I would imagine her family would be suing law enforcement, saying, "What the heck are you doing arresting my daughter?" So it's a tough call. Did they make the right one? I don't know in hindsight, but in retrospect, I think they had to follow the law. The law said separate them and not arrest either one of them. And so, unfortunately, it turned out the way it did, but I don't know if law enforcement would have prevented what happened.
Anthony, do you agree with Bryant's assessment there? And then also separately, for everyone out there on social media that is calling on police here in this encounter to be held responsible, held accountable for how they handle, whether or not, again, this is all going to now There are people online that are saying, of course, that that police handled this appropriately and that they went about this the right way. And then there are those that are, of course, extraordinarily critical, as you would imagine, it's social media, extraordinarily critical of allowing this to just end with just a separation here at the end of the night. So, Anthony, do you agree with what Bryant just said? And also, too, what kind of ramifications now? Are there potential lawsuits or what for people that are demanding that this police department be held responsible here or accountable? What can be done?
Yeah, look, it's easy to sit back and armchair quarterback, and say, hey, this should have happened. When you look at what happened in this particular case through the eyes of law enforcement, it was hard to determine who the aggressor was. And from the evidence that they had established the probable cause, at that time, it appeared, based on Gabby's own admission and based on what Brian said, that Gabby was the initial aggressor. And had we not had this tragic circumstance that we're dealing with now, it wouldn't be an issue. And if you look further on the video, what law enforcement does at the end of this, they say, look, instead of you going to jail, we have a car here from our safe team, or a special critical team that was set up from Moab. And through this Moab policy, if this team is available, rather than one party going to jail and having to bond out, this county allowed one person to be separated, placed in a hotel, and the other person to go on their way. And in this particular case, that's what happened. There was a safety net, a secondary safety net that allowed for separation as opposed to arrest. And in a case like this, when you have the alleged victim, and I say alleged, Brian in this particular case, saying he didn't want her arrested, didn't want her prosecuted, she herself saying it was a mutual combatant situation, she obviously doesn't want to go to jail, law enforcement can't see into the future about what may happen in the future, and they decided to take this route and separate. And if you look at the very end of the video, they do cite Gabby with a citation that would be equivalent to a criminal infraction. And they tell her at the end, because there's no court, you can appear in court via Zoom. So there was action taken, and the action that law enforcement took at that particular time was within the bounds of their policy. Now, moving forward, do I think that policy is going to change? Without a doubt. And I believe this case is going to have a chilling effect, not just on what happens in Moab, but what happens across the country. I know I deal with cases here in Florida in Hillsborough County, where you have domestic situation, and somebody has to go to jail. No matter what the alleged victim may say or what the defendant may say, usually somebody goes to jail. And this case may create that policy where you don't have the separation, where someone has to go to jail, a no contact order may be issued, and ultimately they'll have to go through the court system.
Again, Brian Camerino, Anthony Rickman, Ken Stevens here with you live on WFLA Now. We're going to resume, and we're going to go rapid fire here through all the comments that we have here in the queue here. I would just like to take a moment here to acknowledge, of course, that this is spurring, has already begun to spur a conversation online about how we go about and how we prevent domestic disputes, domestic abuse, domestic violence, prevent these situations from occurring and prevent future tragedies. And I just want to really quickly get the 2 cents here from Anthony and Brian, and Ken, feel free to chime in if you'd like to as well. We need to be better. We need to do better. There's got to be a way that we can be better, and it falls on every state across the country here to have these conversations now, whether it's at the local level, the county level, the state level, or the federal level. There just needs to be more of a conversation. It falls on every one of us to have the right conversations here to prevent future tragedies related to domestic abuse and domestic violence. I think that everybody here watching probably has some connection to some form of a domestic dispute, domestic abuse, or domestic violence. I think that everybody here has been touched by it in some way, and it's a conversation that, in my opinion, just hasn't really picked up enough steam and momentum, and perhaps this tragedy, what happened to Gabby Petito, perhaps that there will be more people trying to carry this conversation forward. But Brian and Anthony, I'm going to ask the two of you, who does that fall now, as far as protocol here? Let's just kind of break down policy and protocol. Does that fall on the state legislature? Does that fall on police departments and their protocols? What has to be done to prevent this sort of situation from ending without a situation where we're all looking back and like Anthony noted, armchair kind of quarterbacking here, weeks later and dissecting every moment of this video? Brian, what do you think?
Okay, so here's what's going to happen. I think Anthony's right. It's going to change. I think it's going to change at the legislative level across the country and to policy level. It's going to be a situation now where law enforcement is going to respond to domestic violence. Somebody's going to be arrested. Regardless, I think if there's probable cause, somebody's going to be arrested. and it may be the right policy to prevent something like this from happening. But I guarantee you, they're going to arrest scores, and it may be all men, it may be some women. Somebody's going to go to jail. There's going to be that grace period where they can't have any contact unless the victim comes forward and says that we want to have contact, and it's going to be a big change. And so within that, the problem is that within that big old net that's going to be cast out there to arrest alleged domestic violence abusers, somebody's going to be wrongfully arrested. So, but I think at the end of the day, I think it needs to change for that reason, to prevent from what happened here. But again, we're assuming, and we don't have any evidence, we're assuming that in this case, Mr. Laundrie committed the homicide of this young lady. But regardless of what the results are of that investigation, everyone's going to get arrested. At least one person is going to get arrested. And then within that, some people may not be maybe wrongfully accused. But I think something needs to be done, and so it'll change at the legislative level and at the policy level.
Anthony, really quick, but as we kind of get on with the comments here and the questions, yeah?
Yeah, and to follow Brian said, I think it starts at the level of law enforcement. Educating law enforcement to look for signs of real victims, look for signs of abuse, educating them through domestic violence advocates on what to see and how to make that decision on who goes in. As a prosecutor, I prosecuted exclusively domestic violence, and one of my biggest fears was, you get rid of a case is null process, the victim isn't cooperative. Is that victim not cooperative because she's scared? Is that victim not cooperative because she feels under duress? And your biggest fear is letting a circumstance happen where you drop a case or someone's not arrested and we see something tragic like this happen to somebody who may have been a victim. So it has to start at the law enforcement level and then work its way up to legislature and making policy that a circumstance, if this is a homicide or any circumstance like this doesn't occur.
And we look forward here at WFLA to being part of solutions and part of having conversations about domestic violence awareness, about domestic abuse awareness. We really look forward to having those conversations here. We have another 15 minutes here, folks, with our experts here on panel: Anthony Rickman, Ken Stevens, Brian Camarado. I'm JB Buno. Let's get to this next one. And this has, of course, been somebody that everyone's been talking about on social media. Ken, I'm really curious to hear your perspective here from Patty Ray, #HeyJB. What happened with Dog the Bounty Hunter? Is he still around? Ken, you are an expert in locating missing people. If there's somebody who's out there and we don't know where they are, you're the person that they call, as far as here in Pinellas County, here in the Tampa Bay area, to track them down here. So what do you make of Dog the Bounty Hunter's involvement here in this case?
I think it's pretty interesting. Obviously, the guy's good at what he does. He's the one thing that gives Dwayne Chapman an advantage is people may respond to him just because of his celebrity status, and that's a positive. I was noticing on one of the videos of him when he was knocking on a door in a car, a couple cars stopped, and everybody jumped out to take pictures. They may also have information, and that may generate phone calls or tips, and that's great. Like I said before, this case is going to be solved because somebody's going to have information and they're going to make a call that that gives law enforcement a tip, and we're going to respond and get this guy. If Dog is able to generate that tip, good for him.
I want to respond here really quickly to some of the commenters here that are talking here about the panel here, and I am very open and honest with our viewers here as far as the comments that are coming in real time. We see the comments coming in about how there needs to be more of a conversation and a more diverse, I think to say the least, a more diverse panel of individuals here to talk about domestic violence and domestic violence awareness. And I want to make it very, very clear for our audience, wherever you're watching from, this was to tap into the legal experts here, the law enforcement experts here on the Gabby Petito, Brian Laundrie story here. I know that there's a lot of folks that want there to be more of a conversation here about domestic violence awareness. We are going to be having those conversations here with you, but that was not the intent of this panel. There will be additional conversations here about that, and we look forward to being part, again, of the solution here. Let's get to some more of the comments that are coming in here. Again, this is a panel here about the Gabby Petito homicide. It's a panel about Brian Laundrie's disappearance here. Let's get to this one here real quickly. Anthony, Debbie Farrell asking, #HeyJB, why is it only a warrant for credit card fraud and not and not murder. And right now, because first and foremost, Anthony, this is not a murder investigation. Right now, it's an homicide investigation. What do you say here for Debbie's comment?
Yeah, right now we don't even know the cause of death. We know that it was deemed a homicide. But in order to charge somebody with murder, you have to establish who caused the death and what actually caused the death. And law enforcement is still conducting their investigation. In a case like this, where there's no direct evidence, you don't have an eyewitness saying, I saw him pull the trigger, or I saw him kill this person, if it's him. Law enforcement has to piece together the evidence to make a circumstantial case. And in order to even get there, they have to prove how Gabby died. And that process, through the autopsy, through the medical examiner's office, takes time. Look, we heard the press conference from the Petito family, how they're not even receiving her body at the current time because they're still doing investigative work in relation to her autopsy. And ultimately, if there is evidence, if they establish that probable cause that she was murdered, and then establish probable cause that Brian Laundrie is the person who murdered her, guaranteed he will be charged. We're just not there yet. And right now they have one charge that they feel that they can stick, one charge they know they can prove, and that's what he's charged with. Ultimately, if the evidence supports it, he will be charged with murder.
How about this one here from Depika Batari, #HeyJB, and we'll send this one over to Brian. What if he's long gone? Let's just not stick with Canada or Mexico. If he's somewhere in Asia, like India or Nepal, this just goes to speak that that people are wondering that could Brian be anywhere in the world? Brian, if Brian Laundrie was located internationally, whether it be Canada, Mexico, or elsewhere, where do the complexities arise there in this case?
Well, first you have to look at the extradition treaty between whatever nation, assuming he's hiding out in some nation. And so some nations have a treaty, hey, we'll extradite your prisoner back to your country if you don't impose a death penalty, as an example. Others have other restrictions. So if he's somewhere or he may be in a country where there is no extradition treaty, so he's going to be hiding out. And so, quite frankly, I think the reason why the feds did what they did in terms of the warrant is that way now they have not only a national law enforcement level of looking for him, but also tap into the international resources. So hopefully they can find him there. This is hard, as you can imagine, for Wyoming police to call Interpol or some international agency to say, hey, help us find this guy. So I think that's to the last question. I think that's the real reason why they went with the one charge federally, because it's easier for them to hopefully find him. But bottom line, they're going to have to look to see what country's in if he's out of country, and what is the treaty between the two countries to see how we can get him back. But if he's in a country where it's extraditable, he'll be back.
I'm going to take this one here from YouTube, from Lisa on YouTube. I'm going to pose it to both Anthony and Brian here. #HeyJB, and Anthony, we'll start here with you, and then Brian, you can chime in here as well. #HeyJB, how can releasing the cause of death interfere with the case? And Anthony, there's been, of course, talk online as to whether or not they're withholding the cause of death for law enforcement and investigative reasons. What's your take on that?
Well, we don't, obviously, when we look at this case, we don't know the cause of death. And look, the suspect is still on the run. So law enforcement's main concern, I say suspect because we believe him to be a suspect in this murder, the person of interest, as he's been deemed, is still on the run. So law enforcement is holding back the evidence. They don't want a situation where they come out and say, hey, we know he killed her in this manner, to further prevent him or further encourage him not to come back. So understand, they're keeping what they have back because this is still an open and pending investigation. And they have to maintain the integrity of their investigation to make sure they have all the evidence and that they gather everything ultimately when they're ready to charge him so that they can charge him. And it's not uncommon in investigations like this for law enforcement to hold back on what they have until the suspect is captured because they want to get him in. Maybe he comes in and gives a full confession and a full statement that's supported with the evidence they find from the autopsy. And until they find him, I don't anticipate, the FBI giving press conferences as to what they may or may not have in relation to proving this charge.
Before Brian, I get your comment here. So Anthony, you said that Brian Laundrie, you said it just now, that he's on the run. I want to make it clear here for our audience here that right now he is a missing persons case in Florida, and he is a person of interest in an FBI-led criminal investigation, but they've made no indication that he is in fact on the run. But that, Anthony, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. That's what you believe.
Yeah, look, we don't know where he is. He's a missing person, but at the same time, obviously, we know law enforcement is looking for him. We know Dr. Bonnyhouse is looking for him. We know that sleuths on the internet are looking for him, and he hasn't turned up yet. So, ultimately, there's no evidence that he's fleeing per se, but he still hasn't turned himself in. He still hasn't cooperated with law enforcement. His parents don't know where he is. I mean, putting two and two together, obviously, he's in a circumstance where you would assume he doesn't want to be found.
Brian, you want to add to that? Yeah.
I agree in terms of going back to the question itself. The biggest collateral benefit to maintaining or withholding the cause of death is if for some reason he did commit this murdered her, and he was dumb enough to blab, hey, I stabbed her 5 times, and the autopsy reports result that it was 5 times that she was stabbed. There's a corroborating evidence that they need to support his confession and to later convict him, if that's in case what happened. So that's, I think, another reason why they're withholding it. So if he's dumb enough to say something to someone, they bring it in as a collateral witness to say, yeah, he confessed to something that only the true killer would know.
How about this question here? We'll bring in Ken from Melvin Jackson here. Hashtag AJB. What happens if he's found dead by his own hand? What happens? Will Gabby ever get the justice that she deserves? Of course, so many people out there are, there's a lot of folks out there that want, of course, Brian to be found alive. I think that overwhelmingly our audience here wants Brian to be found alive because they want justice for Gabby here. But what do we say here, Ken, for Melvin's comment here coming in?
Well, first of all, if he's found dead, that doesn't mean that justice doesn't get served. There still may be plenty of evidence that gives law enforcement information they need to be able to wrap up the investigation with a conclusion and say, yes, he was the perpetrator, or in fact, no, he was not. And that could contribute to justice in that manner. Whether he's guilty or not guilty of the crime, one more death is just one more tragedy. And it's a tragedy that she's gone, and any other person is a tragedy as well. Let me add one other thing that hasn't come up in a question so far, but it's something that needs to be considered in this case. There is a widespread assumption that Brian Laundrie is guilty, and frankly, there's not been a whole lot of reason not to suspect him of being guilty. However, many investigations have failed because an investigator determines a conclusion first and then looks for evidence to support the conclusion. And in cases like this, you need to look at the evidence and let it take you to a conclusion, whatever the actual conclusion is.
And I've been talking about that, Ken, too, about how the internet, of course, has pretty much immediately, almost from his arrival back into Florida, the internet has vilified Brian Laundrie here without really knowing what happened there on the road in their van life road trip and the circumstances surrounding his return here, of course, to Florida. And this is a last call for your hashtag HJB, hashtag WFLA Now, hashtag, really any hashtag you see on your screen here. Any of them, hashtag Anthony, Ken, Brian, will feature your comments here. But Anthony, I want to come back to what we were talking about earlier. You brought up the grand jury here a short time ago, and Auntie Lynn, hi, Auntie Lynn, I like the name, Auntie Lynn on Twitter, hashtag HJB, could the parents be forced to give up their phones by a grand jury order? We were talking about the grand jury earlier and whether or not that's going to be something that's going to happen. What are the benefits? And to answer Auntie Lynn's question here, could they be forced to give up their personal cellular devices here? But let me preface this also by saying that right now, Northport police are saying that Brian Laundrie's parents, Chris and Roberta Laundrie, they're cooperating with this being a missing persons case as far as finding their son.
Yeah, so we don't know what the parents have done. For all we know, the parents have already provided voluntarily the cell phones. We do know that it came out yesterday through the attorney that Brian had purchased a phone when he got back from Florida, and that phone is now in the possession of the FBI. So if the federal government or local officials determine that there was probable cause, they could seek a warrant potentially for the phones of the parents. The grand jury can also potentially subpoena the phone from the parents. But at this point in time, we don't know what the parents are doing because we do know that there's a federal investigation. We do know that they were cooperative to some extent when they reported Brian missing a few days after he disappeared into the preserve. So, to answer the question, yes, it's possible that the federal government, or as well as state and local officials, could subpoena the phones, but it's also quite possible that they're voluntarily cooperating and providing those phones to law enforcement through the course of the investigation in looking for their son.
How about this next one here that just came in a moment ago? And let's, I'll bring everybody in here for this one because this is an interesting one. Maybe Ken, we'll start with you here, but Anthony and Brian, I'd be very curious to hear your perspectives here. And let me just make sure I have it. Tanya B on Twitter, #HJB, #Hey Anthony and Brian. Is there a deadline or maximum time that they would look for Brian? Is it months? Years? We're now in a new month. It is October 1st here, Ken, and the search for Brian Laundrie presses on here. But how long could a search of this magnitude, with, of course, all the money and resources and manpower that's being committed here, how long do you think that this could go on?
I think it could go on until they find him. And what we see now is we saw a very concentrated search in the reserve. We saw a very concentrated search in one area, but we also see that search scaling back based upon active intelligence. And I don't anticipate this being a circumstance where they just stop looking. And whether it be a year, a month, a day, we see America's Most Wanted, we see programs associated with this, we see wanted posters. Law enforcement isn't just going to stop looking for him because they can't find him right away. There are going to be detectives, agents assigned to his case until he is found and located, or until potentially he's cleared. So I don't believe that time is going to hurt that. Time hurts, obviously, in finding him, but time is not going to hurt in them continuing to search for him.
Ken, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. The amount of resources assigned might change, but I don't think anybody's going to quit looking for him.
How about this? We'll end out here on this here, you guys. I'm going to go around the horn here one at a time. Brian, we'll start with you here. Everyone just for a moment here taking off their expert hat here for this last question here. First and foremost, why do you think that so many people are following this story? I have said from the beginning that I think, of course, that it starts really around the world. And where do you see this going here? We don't have any intel that the world, of course, doesn't already have. We have, snippets of information. We have the timeline that has increasingly had its gaps be filled in certain spots here and there. But Brian, as far as the international attention that this story has received and where this goes from here, and the public clamoring for new information at every hour and wanting there to be a resolution to the story, wanting the facts to come out, what do we say here for the public as far as wanting this to result here in a resolution that we can all get behind?
I don't think this is something new. I think since, Casey Anthony, you name it, before that, Ted Bundy, even before social media, I think people, it's a human interest story. There's a bad guy, allegedly a bad guy out there. There's a victim out there, and people will sympathize with her and the family. And I think they want closure just from it's a human interest story. So I don't think this is new. I just think that because of the advent of social media, international news, it has gained more traction. But I remember when I'm old enough to remember when the hostages were being held in Iran. I couldn't wait to see Nightline to find out what the status was. So it's just a human interest story. But because of social media, Netflix and podcasts, it's just more traction. And then, of course, it has an international appeal as well. So I don't think it's new to us.
What do you think, Anthony?
It's a tragedy. No matter how we cut it, there's a young girl whose life was lost. And this is a young girl who's, she broadcast her life on the internet. They documented her van tour. So she's somebody who I think is attached to a lot of girls. She could be my daughter. She could be anyone's daughter. She could be anyone's sister. And when you just look at the surrounding circumstances of him coming back without her, and then him not presenting himself now, the intrigue behind that about what happened, and then unfortunately I find her body. I think it's a real life, mystery. And I believe that people are following it because that Gabby could be anybody's friend, sister, brother, and it's sad, it's tragic, it's horrific to see, knowing that the ultimate result is she's no longer with us. And I think as a society, when you see the facts of this case and you hear it, it creates that real life drama that people are attracted to, and it's playing in front of our eyes, in front of the eyes of the world.
Ken, I'm going to ask you the same question here as well, but also I'm going to add on here, you being our missing persons experts, same question, but also the add-on here, are we ever going to find Brian Laundrie?
First of all, this is the news item it is because now we have 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news. It's on our TV, the radio, the computer, it's on your cell phone. You're confronted with it every single minute and every form of media. So it's there. Number two, yes, absolutely. I think Brian Laundrie is going to be found. I've heard people, I just came back from a trip, and I heard people when we were sitting around at different locations going, look at that person, they look like Brian Laundrie. People are looking, and someplace he's going to show up, somebody's going to.
I'd like to thank our entire panel here for joining us here, everybody, on WFLA Now, taking time out of their day here to join us and have a conversation here on the latest on, of course, Gabby Petito there at the center of your screen, the manhunt for Brian Laundrie, the new video, of course, out of Utah. Same encounter, but a new perspective there of that incident that occurred there, of course, in Utah. I'd like to thank all of our panelists here. Ken Stevens, of course, from SIG 14 Investigations, Anthony Rickman from the Rickman here, of course, in Tampa Bay, as well as Brian Camerano, attorney of law here in Tampa. I'd like to really thank our entire panel. I'm going to be staying on stream here for just a few more minutes, you guys. You guys can, of course, hop off the Zoom call, but a big thank you to all of you guys.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, you guys. First and foremost, I want to address the commenters about the domestic violence conversation that needs to be happening here in this country. This was not a panel for domestic violence abuse or domestic violence awareness, but that's a conversation that needs to be had. This was a panel, of course, to just bring you some of the expertise from some of the experts themselves. Some people here in the area conversation about domestic violence awareness. It's got to happen. It's got to be diverse. It's got to be wide. Be a collaborative. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to see, and quite frankly, when you're trying to piece together a panel very, very quickly, I'm just going to be honest with how it works here in the media. When you're trying to piece together a panel really quickly, of course, we were just throwing phone calls out there, and it just so happened to be that we had 4 men, including myself here on the panel here today. That wasn't intentional. That was just by, of course, just the organizations that are out there. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to be part of conversations. I would love to be part of a solution, and I would love to use what we have here as far as this audience to have that conversation and talk and raise awareness and be part of preventing future tragedies. So that's what I will say about domestic violence. It is something that in very, very terrible ways. For some people, it's on the fringe, and some people, it's near and dear to their reality. And I really look forward to, again, and really applies to all of us around world developments here over the course of the day. I'd like to point before our stream began here, Utah incident.